Okay. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, okay.
It's yours.
Um, share my screen. All right. So can you see that
Yes.
PixInsight screen? All right. Ooh. Dan just asked whether there's anybody interested in showing some of the PixInsight scripts that are available out there, some of the newer stuff. And I've been using some of them, so I figured I'd walk through some of them. There's two sets. Mostly I've been learning about them by watching Adam Block tutorials. And I mean, I've subscribed to a couple of different PixInsight tutorial websites. And to me, the Adam Block ones are by far the best because he stays pretty much up to date with the latest stuff. Whenever there's something new like Blur Exterminator or something that comes out, it seems like he's got half an hour tutorial on it pretty soon. And it's all very much step-by-step instructions for doing stuff, and you can follow it along pretty easily. So um, I wouldn't normally try to advertise something like that, but I just have been kind of impressed with the stuff that he's done. So what I was going to show was uh, the scripts that are available. I'm trying to find I got a Word, oh, I had a Word document that was listed in. Oh, there it is right there. I've got a Word document that talks about it, and I'll post that. But there's a set of scripts that are available from a guy named Juergen Terpe. That's that link to PixInsight forum thread that went out with the invitation to this telecon. And you can get all of his scripts by just adding a single resource to your PixInsight resources. If you just go into manage repositories, there's a single repository that's his, and it's this IDE device apps one right here that's got all of he calls it the PixInsight Toolbox. And those are mostly the scripts that I'm going to go through. There's a couple of other scripts I wanted to bring up that are kind of co-authored by a guy named Mike Cranfield, along with Bill Blanchon. Any people that are familiar with PixInsight probably recognizes the name Bill Blanchon.
Mm-hmm.
You guys heard that? He publishes a lot of pixel math scripts that do things, and he's now getting this Mike Cranfield guy to put some of those pixel math scripts into separate scripts that are bundled with the user interface and stuff, which I think makes it a little bit easier to use. So that's just kind of the introduction. So I'm going to show you the toolbox. If you load that IDE device apps in as a repository, it adds this toolbox menu to the scripts menu. And this is the list of all of the scripts that are in that toolbox. There's really nothing, earth-shaking, I don't think, in any of those, but they do a lot of things that normally would take 4 or 5 different steps, maybe. Plus, they bring, I think, to PixInsight some of the kinds of operations that you can do with Photoshop, of manipulating color spaces, blending images together in various different ways, kind of like you do with Photoshop layers or with any kind of image editing program that operates with layers. And so I just wanted to show just kind of walk through what some of these are. And I'm just going to kind of go down the list here one by one. Auto linear fit. Linear fit is one where you can take a one-shot color image with that's got narrow. It was taken with a dual band, narrow band filter, and create various different and do a linear fit amongst the three channels. And so I've got this image popped up here, which is a unstretched image of M16 taken with our hydrogen alpha, oxygen 3 dual band, and one-shot color camera. And so you run that on it, and it'll just do, you can see where it created in the background red, green, and blue temp images. It's doing a linear fit on those and then recombining them again. And that's just kind of an operation that, let me do oh, I got my screen transfer function up here. If you do a linked screen stretch, that's what it looks like. If you do an unlinked screen stretch, that's what it looks like. And you can get to this point or to the other point by using all the normal processes. But that's just something that would take you several different steps to do if you were doing that on your own. It's not earth-shaking by any means, but it's a nice little bundle. There's one called BG Visualizer. I'm not really going to show that. It's supposed to be something that allows you to let me pull up the allows you to visualize what's in the background of your image. And that's why it's called BG Visualizer. And you can control what the background value is by using these sliders. I haven't used this before, but I think if you called an image up in that and change the slider to an appropriate value, what it's showing now is just nebula image data in here with not a whole lot in the background. So I guess that's a good indicator that there's not a lot of gradients or like, I'm sure if you had some kind of gradient or any kind of vignetting or anything like that, it would show up around the edges. But again, that's not something I've really used a whole lot. I just went through them all. Combine HA with RGB. This is something that there's a whole bunch of different ways to do. There's probably 4 or 5 people out there that I've seen that have a script to combine HA data with an RGB. I'm going to call up a couple of images. This is NGC 5033, and these are not linear images. It says you can use either with those linear images or non-linear images. Let me zoom in on the galaxy. So the galaxy, let's first just turn off how much of the HA we're adding. So that's what the RGB looks like. Okay. And the HA image has got just what I'm trying to show is the H2 regions in this galaxy. And so you can just kind of slide this slider over and see how much HA you want to add in there. It's even got this slider called beta, and a hydrogen alpha filter will not include light from the hydrogen beta emission line. The hydrogen beta emission line is blue. I've always been kind of a proponent and that a lot of these H2 regions in galaxies have a lot of hydrogen beta emission included, and unless you use a hydrogen beta filter, you never see it. But if that's what this slider is to basically add a little blue to the areas where you're adding hydrogen alpha to give it that kind of pinkish color that HA regions in galaxies typically have. Did that make sense? What I was talking about is that you're adding a little, you're basically with this beta line, you're adding a little blue to simulate the blue signal from hydrogen beta that is included in areas like H2 regions, like in M42 or stuff. Hydrogen regions that are very highly energized are going to emit a good fraction of a hydrogen beta along with the hydrogen alpha. And that beta line is in the blue.
So Mark, quick question. So with those sliders, would you normally set those to be about the same amount left and right to get the ratios that are typical? Or is that not a thing?
I'm looking at, it doesn't say how much it puts in there. It just says that a small part of the hydrogen alpha will be added. So I assume that's just like a percentage amount. How much hydrogen beta emission occurs depends on how energized the hydrogen is. In other words, how bright the source is that's causing the nebula to glow. Have you ever seen a hydrogen discharge tube? It's just a tube with hydrogen in it, and then you put a high voltage across it. When you do that with hydrogen in the tube, it glows pinkish. It's not red like you see in most hydrogen nebula because of that hydrogen beta emission line. And for H2 regions, like I use M42 as the best example, there's so much energy hitting the hydrogen from the trapezium stars in M42 in particular, that, you know, if you had, the hydrogen is really glowing in a very pinkish color. And that's what you see a lot in images that are published of galaxies with hydrogen alpha or hydrogen added to it, is that the H2 regions look pinkish instead of just red. And that's what that slider is allowing you to do. If you turn it off, they're redder. So I don't know how far over you can slide it. The further you slide it, the more pink it's going to get. And so it's a convenient way to add hydrogen alpha data to an RGB. And you can even do a convolution on the hydrogen alpha to try to sharpen it up if you want. I've never really noticed that does a whole lot. And I'd rather do that separately by hand on the hydrogen alpha. Let me show you the two images that I'm combining there. Oops. Okay, so this is the RGB starless, and this is the hydrogen alpha starless that I'm combining for that. Okay, and I've got a script already that I usually use to do that. It's a pixel math script. And it basically does a screen in of the hydrogen alpha with a couple of parameters that tell it how much of the hydrogen alpha to put in and how much of the hydrogen beta to put in. But this toolbox script, I think, does a lot better job of adding that. So it's something you can play around with. I wasn't going to go into too much detail on any of these really. The next script is one that's called Combine Images. And we'll just go ahead and pick the same two images just for the heck of it. There are various different ways of combining two images. And this is one where this is something that gives you kind of the same sort of capabilities that you do in any kind of photo editing program, where you have a whole bunch of different ways to combine these two images as if they were layers. Anybody familiar with Photoshop? Dan, I think you in particular. I mean, this list kind of looks like the kind of list of ways that you can merge layers in when you're working with them in Photoshop. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So, there's actually another script I'm going to talk about that does the same thing, but this is the same kind of thing. And I haven't gone through and tried any of these. A lot of these are really a lot more useful for regular photography than they might be for astrophotography. But if you want to try any of these, you can do it. And then you can adjust the amount of each image that you want to add to it and the vibrance of them. You can even put an intensity mask on it. If you're working with images or with linear images, you can auto stretch them. The one that I use, I don't actually use that combined images school script. I use one of the Mike Cranfield ones that's called Image Blend. So this one, let me show you where the repository. This one comes, and I'm gonna put my Word document up that's got all these repositories in it. But Mike Cranfield's are all on this cosmic photons, and on his webpage, each one of his tools is a separate resource. And so instead of all of them being bundled together in a toolbox like the Juergen Terpe ones are, they're all a bunch of separate scripts that you can add. And I use the image blend script instead of using LRGB combine. And I think that's the most useful one. And I'll just show you. Okay. This is an LRGB combination of a final RGB with HA image, and then this image called Starry is a luminance image. And you would normally use the built-in PixInsight LRGB combine to put those together. But this particular tool has a whole lot more options in terms of, how much of the luminance you want. You can adjust the brightness of the luminance, both at the black point at the high end, at the low end. By adjusting the sliders, you can adjust how much of the RGB image you want. There's just all kinds of options for doing it that give you a lot more capability than using just the simple LRGB combine process. And again, this blend mode here has got the same sort of list of things that you can do. So you can do a lot more than just do a luminance combination. But that's all I'm using it for right here. And so that's the result of it. So this is my new tool for doing LRGB combines rather than just using the straight up LRGB combination process in PixInsight. I'm going to skip over a couple things. Continuum subtraction is a tool that's useful if when you're getting an HA image ready to combine with an RGB image, a lot of times the HA images have a lot of signal in them that are from, especially from a galaxy, signal that's from stars and not from HA regions in particular. And you'd like to be able to subtract out of the HA image any signal in that HA image that's coming from stars instead of from hydrogen clouds. And that's what this tool allows you to do. You pick your RGB view that you want to use. And then you pick your narrowband view that you want to use. And determine how much you want to subtract from it. Those aren't the two right ones. But it allows you to remove from this kind of image, an HA image, some of the signal that shows up in HA that doesn't come from hydrogen regions. I mean, stars have signals, have photons coming out of them from the HA region, from the HA wavelength that aren't from hydrogen 2 regions. And so that's what that continuum subtraction does. It's pretty useful because there's really not another option that I know of for doing that. And especially when doing galaxies like this, your HA signal, your HA image can end up with a lot of signal from stars in it, because just from the stars in the galaxy, that's not necessarily just from HA regions. And you can't always get rid of that just by clipping off the low end of the image. Create HDR image is pretty much runs the PixInsight HDR multiscale transform, but it just gives you a different user interface for doing it. So I'm not going to go through all that right at this point. But these are all the settings for basically running an HDR multiscale transform on an image. Create Hubble palette from OSC. Whoops. Gotta find my Hubble palette. Okay, so here's the this is another one for creating different palettes from dual band images. Okay, so your input to this one says, if you read it, it says create different color palette images from a linear, color, dual narrowband images. So my input to that is a dual band image of M16 that we took out in New Mexico. And you can pick which palette you want it to recombine that in. You can tell it to do SHO, or you can tell it to do a 4-ax HOO. Those are all just different palettes that reassign the colors in different ways. And this can be a pain in the butt to try to do manually, and to have this kind of a tool available to create, particularly SHO images from a dual band one-shot color image really helps a lot, I think. If you've ever done any of that kind of thing. Any kind of SHO image or HOO image is not a real life image. It's basically you're doing it to make a pretty picture type of thing. So what colors come out of it is whatever you feel like is the right thing. Enhanced nebula for this one. Oh, this one is for nonlinear images. Let me find a nonlinear image. Okay, we'll just use that same NGC 5033. So again, this script really just gives you a lot of the kind of adjustment parameters that you get typically from doing curves or various other image corrections in Photoshop type of program, and it just puts it in PixInsight. So I just see this thing, Enhanced Nebula, as a way of taking it into Photoshop, doing a little enhancement to it, and bringing it back into PixInsight, but doing all that stuff just within PixInsight. And so I think a lot of his scripts are things like that. He's got 2 scripts for running Graxpert, both in Graxpert is this gradient extraction program. I don't use Graxpert much anymore, so I haven't used either one of those. So I'm just going to skip over those at this point. If you use Graxpert, this is just basically a way of running Graxpert from a user interface within PixInsight. Improved Brilliance is another one of these another one of these tools that kind of gives you photo image editing parameter adjustments within PixInsight. I mean, you could do all of this kind of stuff with the curves and the histogram transform processes in PixInsight, but this kind of puts them all together and allows you to play with things like brilliance and do color shifts. With your image right within PixInsight, including doing some sharpening if you want. And they all affect the image right there within PixInsight, rather than having to take your PixInsight image out into Photoshop or some other photo processing program and do it there. There's a lab color boost that allows you to work in the lab space instead of in, let me open my other image. You'll have to bear with me. I didn't practice this as much as I probably should have. Try it with that one. Okay. So it basically lets you play with LAB colors settings instead of RGBs. I actually have another tool that I use to do that. What I did, this is something that I learned in an Adam Block tutorial. If you take your regular curves tool in PixInsight, you can play around with the LAB. That's what these A and B selections down here are. And Adam Block gave a tutorial one time and it said, if you pick the B channel to operate on and you stick in some anchor points on your curve so that you can adjust the curve in between them, it basically gives you the ability to manipulate the lab color space A and B channels from within curves. And so you can increase and decrease the blues with that one, and you can increase and decrease the yellows by manipulating that section of it. So this is, again, something that you can do pretty easily in Photoshop, but it's a lot harder to do in PixInsight. So that's what I use, just instead of that toolbox thing. And those are about the only ones from his toolbox that I use. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that those are ones that to me seem to bring more Photoshop type tools into PixInsight. And the only other one I wanted to show one more was this is obviously an image that the stars have been subtracted from. Normally, the way you go about adding those back in is by using a pixel math script to do something called screen in stars. And you have to have an RGB stars image, which I think I just deleted in order to do that. Let me look down here. So this is just a script to basically undo what Star Exterminator does by putting the stars back into your starless image. And that didn't work right because the stars have been stretched and this image wasn't. Let me undo that. But a better way to do that, and I'm gonna do it with a luminance image, because this one I know works right. So here's a luminance example of doing that same thing. So that's a screen in of stars that were removed from Star Exterminator. Let me undo that and do it to a copy of it. There's another script from Mike Cranfield. And again, the link to that will be in the document that I post. It's called Screen Stars. And this script was actually created by him and Bill Blanchard to do the same thing that I just did with that pixel mask script. But it does something like that. It's called a reverse stretch as part of it. And so there's I just wanted to compare these two. Actually, let me zoom in a little bit on it because it looks better when you. So this one is done using the standard pixel math script where you just screen in the stars back in. This is the one that uses the screen stars script. And I think the screen star script does a much better job of putting the stars back into a starless image without overblowing them too much, particularly in galaxies. That's putting back stars that are in front of a galaxy has always been a problem when you're trying to recombine stars with a starless image. And this script, I think, does a much better job of it. So that's the one that's called Screen Stars. And the only other one that wasn't part of the toolbox was the image blend one. And all the rest of them are available from that Juergen Terpe toolbox. So that's about all I had to talk about for all of those. I apologize for it being a little bit disconnected, but I really was just going to go through and play around with them. And I didn't script it as well as I probably should have. So questions, anyone? Nope. Okay. Dan, back to you.
Okay.
Hey, I do have one question. Dan, when you are doing your work in Photoshop,
Mhm.
where Mark was talking about using the dodge or burn combine, do you have a recommendation on what you would use to put those things together like that? The equivalent of Photoshop, but do it with that one tool that had the same sort of Mark, what did you call them? Their little utilities to layer things together, I guess.
Right. The image blend,
Yeah.
all
Is
the
there a sort of recommendation
different
for
ways you can blend two layers together.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Photoshop, I typically take my luminance in there and then an RGB and then I set the blending mode to I believe it's luminance. It's actually called luminance. And
Okay.
that's how I combine them.
All right.
I have used some of those others, Screen, and there's a couple others that you can use too. But that's typically how I put my initial image together.
One of the Adam Block tutorials, he was using soft light, taking two copies of the same image and using soft light to combine them. And I wasn't quite sure exactly what that was doing, but it made it look better.
Yeah, there's a way you can, his old school way of thinking with Photoshop was you can make a couple duplicate layers and you change the blending mode to soft light and it increases the contrast. And then you typically use some kind of mask to only use it on the galaxy or whatever you want the contrast. And then you put it back together. That was one way of doing it. And it's similar to your lab deal in Photoshop. A lot of times people who wanted more saturation colors for red and blue, they change the mode of the image to lab, pull up curves, and then drag the top of the curve to the left or the right for the blue and the red, and it gives you a lot more color. So that tool looks like it's just mimicking all the old school ways of doing things in Photoshop that were they were always hidden in PixInsight. Now it gives you a menu to get to them.
Well, Adam Black has a bunch of tutorials on using PixInsight, but he is also must be an expert on Photoshop too, because he's got a whole bunch of tutorials for using Photoshop. And I don't watch the Photoshop ones, but when you're watching the PixInsight ones, sometimes he'll say, oh, this is just like doing blah, 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 whatever in Photoshop. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, if it's something that you use a lot in Photoshop and you can now do it in PixInsight, that always impressed me a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, when I took his workshops or whatever, I took his first and only advanced one. And that was back in like 2015, maybe. And he was just now starting to use this new PixInsight tool. And but he was still mainly using Photoshop, but he's since moved on from Photoshop. And
If you go back in now and look at some of his end-to-end workflows with a particular image set, you know, and he goes from beginning to end for some galaxy or some LBN or something like that. And it's really interesting to see all the different tools he uses and the different ways he does different things and enhances different parts of it. So, I mean, it's not just the old kind of stretch and change saturation and call it done type of stuff. It's and almost all of his stuff seems to be done with separate starless and star images that he's separated by using Star Exterminator.
any other questions on Mark's presentation?